Hey, Matt. So glad to have you here today on this podcast. I think the audience is going to be super excited, but with what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, great being here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So, Matt, one of the things that really intrigued me is your post on AX is the new UX, which went viral. I saw a lot of people tweeting about it and resharing that post. Uh, and you talked about agent experience becoming the new experience, and you compared it with user experience and developer experience, right? Can you talk a little bit about it and why you think AX is the new UX?
Yeah, absolutely, right? Like so the first piece of it is really like that I think it's pretty clear now that this agentic aspect of AI is going to be a really important part of how software works with humans in the future, right? Like that seems like we've already reached that threshold where we're seeing enough proof that if we look 5 years into the future with the current rate of improvement there, right? Like a lot of the ways we use software will be in collaboration with agents, right? Like in our space where Netlify as a platform really supports developers building for the web, it seems clear that like developers are going to be using agents that write code, that work on their code, that collaborate them on their projects, and that also starts doing things like doing deployments and helping operate your projects and so on, right? Um, and while we're still in the early stages of that, it seems very clear that I have a very hard time imagining like 5 years from now looking back and saying, oh, that was just like a fad. It didn't really change anything. Like we are
Mhm.
all still writing code in the same way, running code in the same way as we were 5 years ago, right? Like it seems like it'll be a big change.
Absolutely.
And and when I first like Don Norman wrote this article about the UX way back in the 90s, and I was kind of like a big reader of everything like the Nielsen Institute
Mhm.
published back then, and sort of this whole discipline of starting to obsess about the interaction between humans and your whole product and that holistic vision, right? Like, and really building great products by understanding how people actually like learn to use your product, on board to it, build with it, right? And when I started Netlify on the other hand, right, like it was as a developer tool for people building for the web with this thesis that okay, if we really obsess over that developer experience of like how does a developer go from code to something running on a URL in front of users, we
Mhm.
can really help make the web a better platform essentially, right? Like by reducing that friction. And now as we're starting seeing such a lot of the developer tooling actually shifting to become like work with agents, and we start seeing tools like Bolt.new or Lovable as entry point, or just tools like Cursor or Copilot or Cody or
Yeah.
Windsurf, like being being like the environments developers work in, right? I started seeing that okay, the developers now often don't directly like directly write their code or directly do their deployments and so on, right? Like it happens in collaboration with an agent. And that agent actually has an experience of the product, right? Like that agent will experience frictions or no friction. It will have an easier time figuring out and not figuring it out, right? And that led me to start talking internally at Netlify around this term of agent experience, right? Like and of AX as the next frontier for us, that if we could nail our agent experience, that would be the real path to better developer experience,
Mhm.
better user experience for us, right? Like
Yeah.
because all development in a couple of years will involve agents. And then we started thinking a lot about like, okay, so what does it actually mean to have a better agent experience, right? Like what's different from a developer and so on. That kind of becomes the next point. But I think this also really generalizes. It's not just a concern for Netlify, right? Like I think almost everyone building a product will need to start thinking about how are these agents that your users wants to work with, gonna work with your product, and how good is your agent experience? Because eventually, when it becomes like the standard way of working, people will pick products, they will pick platform, they'll pick tools that are better for their agent to
Mhm.
work with than tools that are hard for their agents to work with.
Yeah. Very, very, very interesting. So, I was thinking while you were speaking, it's so one way of it is to look at it as you have all these agentic IDEs like Windsor, Cursor, etc., that
Yeah,
are helping you
yeah,
build apps faster, right?
yeah,
But when you deploy apps or when you deploy
yeah,
software, the users are going to be agents too, to a certain extent.
yeah,
So I want to double click on that part, right?
yeah,
When you imagine this world of agents using software along with humans and apps,
yeah.
how do people build software? How do you make your software more accessible to these AI agents?
Yeah, that's we started this open source website agentexperience.ax as well to sort of start publishing research and starting industry level discussions and so on, right? Like because it feels obvious that we're still in the very early stages of that, where the first pieces we're kind of really lacking is open standards like helping agents use our software, right?
Yeah.
We have emerging tools like llms.txt, um, things like custom context files. At Netlify, we just improved our agent experience by launching our own custom context file and integrating those into our CLI. So, like, if you want to work with cursor and so on, you can install that context file with one command, and cursor or windsurf or whatever can start getting much better at using our primitives and not
Mm.
get confused on how Netlify functions work or
Mm.
how blob storage work and so on, right? Like, but these are but it's still like very loosely defined standards of like
Mm.
how do agents find context files like that, or your product.
Yeah.
There's like an LLM does TXT that's like just write a markdown file and hope it works, right?
Yeah.
So I think in all of those areas we're sort of in these stages where there are different competing emerging. There's like a model context protocol as a piece, but as an industry, we haven't yet sort of really come up with like what are the right patterns, which
Mm.
makes this a really
Yeah.
fascinating time to be in this space, right? Like
Absolutely.
because it's all up to us to actually
Yeah.
figure that part out, right? Like, and there's this interesting gap right now where, on the one hand, if you take like GPT-4 and just set it up with like you pick some product, you take their open API spec, and you give GPT-4 that open API spec and try to set up tool use and then start using GPT-4, you probably get a pretty bad result, and it's probably
Mm.
gonna
Yeah.
like hallucinate a lot and
Oh,
do
yeah.
a lot of weird
Mhm.
things, right? Like, and then on the other hand, if you take like operator and start using the product, that probably works pretty well, right? Like that it can probably go use the product with you and do things, but at the same time, it feels like an extreme Rube Goldberg's machine to
Yeah.
like have a human UI and then a human browser that you run in a virtual mode, and you take screenshots of the UI and feed it to a multimodal model, and then the model can tell the browser what to do. It's like, okay, it
Yeah.
works, but it's probably somewhere in between that open API spec and that
Yeah.
virtual browser. Like, there gotta be a better abstraction in that's works for LLMs, and that also gives LLMs enough context on the full workflow and the usability of something to take the right decisions. Um,
Yeah.
there's attempts like agents.json to help exposing tool use and so on, right? Like, but I still think we're missing some of those layers of like agentic user interface. Again, really thinking about, okay, what is the actual agent experience
Yeah.
that as an industry we have to start collaborating on, between companies building agents and between companies building products and companies like us that sits in a really interesting platform space where we help lots and lots of developers build products on the web, right? Like, so
Mm.
if agent starts working with us, we can sort of help all of those developers follow similar practices and do the
Mm.
right thing.
Yeah, it's very interesting times to set the industry standards in a space like this. I was using Operator the other day and I gave it commands to go and access some complex sites. It took a
Yeah.
lot of time because, as you said, the sites are not ready, right? It's
No,
front end
no.
action.
Yeah.
Um, so one follow-up question on that, right? And by the way, I was hosting an event with a bunch of CTOs yesterday night, and they were all talking about this. What you're talking about, right? Is you have to make the current applications agent ready. So you have to abstract your APIs, your software, everything, all the components to make sure agents understand that. And like you said, there might be a space between front end interactions like operator and OpenAI API specs, right? uh, like if you what is your advice to, let's say there's there are a bunch of applications today, right? And they're all trying to see, how do I adapt my existing app with my existing users to this agentic
Yeah.
world? What does it
Yeah.
mean to make their app agent ready? Could you double click on that, like in terms of, do they make their APIs ready, permissioning ready, authentication? What goes into it?
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, the first part, like for example, for Netlify, the first part we started looking at was authentication flow and access, right?
Mhm.
Um, in our case, for example, we realized that often, like that to give a great agent experience, we needed a way for an like our core operation is kind of like deploying something to a URL. So we needed a way for an agent to initiate that first deploy to a URL without the human having to go set up a new site and authenticate and all of that, right? Like,
Mhm.
so that was very much a question around like an entry point for an agent to our system that didn't require initial human intervention, right? Like, and I think that's pretty generalized that I see as a lot of companies start thinking about working with these agents. One of the first things they have to start thinking about is authentication flows and handover there. And it's obviously about that a lot of the companies building off as a service, like from WorkOS to Clerk to Stitch to Auth0, are all thinking a lot about right
Yeah.
now, right? Like what are the key patterns of agent authentication and agent access that we need to have in place, right? Like, and you typically then start also building, you know, a level of like in Netlify, I think we just launched, which just like you can see in the UI if a deploy was created from GitHub or from GitLab. Now you can also see if the deploy was created from Bolt or for one of those agents,
Mm.
right? Like that kind of becomes the next level of like, how do we actually give visibility of like, what did the agent do? What did the human do? Right? Like, so I think that's like the first level is that kind of like basic workflow between human and agent in terms of authentication, logging, visibility of who is doing what and who is accessing what, that I think really generalizes into like, if you don't have a good story there, you're probably never going to have a great agent experience, since it's really like the entry point to the system. And then I think the next piece starts being to figure out like, from the core functionalities of your product, are there differences in how an agent will need to approach those from how a human will need to approach those? And that's really like, there we go more into like the territory of this as a discipline, right? Like similar to UX, where it's not like it's like the five like checklist
Yeah.
boxes and now you have great UX, right? Like, but where it is really about like sitting down and watching five users use your product, and you'll start seeing like 90% of the things that are really confusing about your product real fast, right?
Yeah.
Similar with once you really start seeing LLM based agents, can they, like, how good are they at using your products, and I think you have to do differently for them. And I'll take a small example from Netlify's product, right? Like where Netlify has a built-in form detection feature where if you're a developer approaching this, you'll discover that we have that feature either through our docs or through our UI, where like in your app, you'll see that there's forms, you'll see they're not enabled, and you can say, okay, how would I enable forms? Here's the docs, right? Like, okay, first step, I need to enable forms in the UI. And now whenever I write any form in HTML, I can just add a Netlify attribute, and now Netlify will detect the form and set up a little backend, right? Like when we look at the agent experience around that, now you might ask, like, I had like a concrete example where I built my blog with Bolt.new, one of these agents, right?
I
Like,
read about that.
and
Yeah.
someone asked me on Twitter, hey, can you add an email sign up form so I can get an email next time you host a blog post? And I was like, okay, let's see if Bolt can do that. And I went to Bolt and said, like, can you add an email sign up form? And Bolt, I was happy to see that Bolt knew about Netlify forms, right? Like, and he just wrote a
So it did
perfectly.
that. Yeah.
It did that, but I deployed it and it didn't work.
Yeah.
Now, why didn't it work? Well, it didn't work because like I hadn't turned on form detection in Netlify, right?
Mm.
Um, and if it was myself as a developer that had learned about form detection from Netlify's UI for Netlify docs, I would obviously be aware at that moment. First step, turn on form detection, otherwise we won't detect your forms, right? Like,
Yeah.
but since I initiated that whole operation from the agent, and the agent just knows from the context of all of our docs and all of the world that you can add a form in Netlify, right? Like that would actually like now I was fortunate, right? Like I'm a founder of Netlify, I know how it works, and I know okay, it doesn't work because I need to turn it on. But if I was like an a new developer to Netlify and I had not used forms before, right? Like I would have had no chance. There would have been no discovery process in that whole flow where I, as a developer, would have had any chance of figuring out why forms are not working, right? Like, so now we have to go back and say, okay, uh, with Bolt, we need to give it a way to to enable form detection outside of the user, right? Like, and we might even just assume that it, like that for both sides, maybe we always check for forms,
Hmm.
um, because the agent experience is different from the user experience, right? Like, and
Yeah.
that's like a very small, very concrete example, right? Like, but it's just an example of like how you need to start actually thinking through the holistic lens of an agent doing something on behalf of a user instead of a user doing something with the system. Is your like does your product actually work
Mm.
correctly in that case? And if not, you have to fix it to have a better agent
Yeah.
experience, right? Like, and I think again, very small, very tactical example, but you'll see that across all of your product features, right? Like how ready are they to be used from an agent, and in and if an agent used them, will the human understand what the agent did, and how the operation served them?
Yeah. Awesome. So I think that's a good segue into my next question, Matt. When you're building for agents, right, and you have this AX layer, um, I think I read this again in one of your posts where you said an open agent approach is better than a closed agent one. And I think what you're referring to there is a lot of people are building agents like Microsoft, Google for their own
Yeah,
apps, but
yeah,
not opening it up to other agents. And if you
yeah,
do that, it's so much more powerful. So could you comment on that?
yeah. I think this is obviously like thinking around what kind of world do we actually want to build towards, right? One of open platforms or closed platforms, one where we take models like the open web and really build around it, or one where we have different sort of vertical silos that are sealed off from each other as walled gardens. And I think because we lack these standards for agent experience, we're currently mostly in a world where most companies build vertical stacks, where Google Docs is an example, right? Like all over Google Suite, I will have different like
Hmm.
Gemini icons that can do stuff, right? Like, but if I'm like a a ChatGPT Pro subscriber, and I have a bunch of like custom instructions and memory that helps with writing and so on, right? Like there's not like a an obvious way to just use my ChatGPT agent to help me write inside
Yeah.
Google Docs, right? Like
Yeah.
there's like then people that work around it, right? Like you
Mhm.
build like there's some people that build browser extensions to use ChatGPT within Google Docs, or
Yeah.
you could possibly use Operator to can take virtual browser screenshots and do all of that and so on, right? Like so people will find ways around, but we lack the open standards for these kind of
Mm.
like this is the agent I want to use.
Mm.
Just make it easy to use your product, right? Like, and I think building those open standards and start opening up the world of our product will give much more power to users, and will also get us like that much richer ecosystem where you can have your different products and your different agents, and there's
Yeah.
competition and on each of those layers. That I think eventually becomes a stronger and more open model, but it really requires us to start thinking in that way, not as like I am building agentic features all over my product, but more around I'm building the right AX
Yeah.
for my product, so agents
Can
can
actually.
help my
Yeah.
users get more out of my product.
I think that statement should be underlined. It's such an important statement. And if I, the more we think about it, it seems more natural for end user agents, like you said, operator, someone who has context of the end user, to
Yeah,
use that context to access applications. So,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, otherwise you're redoing a lot of stuff and you're reteaching the agents of these apps, what you like and what you dislike and what your context is. So, it makes a lot of
yeah,
sense.
exactly, right. Like, and I think that there's also a lot of thoughts to that part of like that's been around from a while, right? Like this idea of bringing sort of your own data as a user to different applications instead of every application having data inside. That I think this agentic world can also start. Um, like I think there's some will be some convergence over time between those idea of like um of like truly federated applications in a way, and agentic applications, but we are in the very early stages of that,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I think just as at first we really need to start by figuring out as an industry and collaborating as an industry on like how do we actually build the right standards to let agents use our products in a consistent and simple manner.
Yeah, absolutely. So Matt, last couple of questions. One was around, you pioneered the concept of Jamstack many years
Yeah,
ago. A lot of people followed that. And then Jamstack became composable architecture. And now you're talking about
yeah,
AI-powered web development. I read somewhere that Netlify, you see 1,000+ sites being created on a daily basis from agents, which is insane, right? So
it's now it's like I think 1,000 was like just purely from our ChatGPT agent. Now we are starting to see about 10,000 new sites a day created from like that originates with AI agents, and it's only increasing.
that's insane. Yeah. So with so many AI agents deploying sites everywhere and proliferation of these, apps and websites happening, right? Uh, how do software developers think about, their own apps, right? And like, I think you talked about it a little bit where they are using agentic IDE tools to enhance the experience. But then there's also a plethora of other, sites coming up, right? Which compete with them. So how do they win the battle here?
Yeah, I mean, I keep having this theory that we'll see two phenomenons, right? Like the one is that, and that's mostly what we're seeing now, where I think like building the same kind of apps and websites and stores that we built during the last 10 years, the cost of that will just go down dramatically, right? Like,
Mhm.
um, it's now with tools like Bolt already much easier to build, right? Like, and this is the worst that these agentic tools will ever be, right? Like, they're only going to get better from now on, right? Like, so the cost of building the kind of web experiences we're building today will really go down, which typically typically will mean that demand for them like will go up, right? Like typically when the cost of some resource goes down, demand goes up, and we start getting more of it, right? Like so we will probably just expect like huge step change up in how many web apps people build, right? Like
Yeah.
it can be a piece of disrupting some of the SaaS industry, right? Like where companies might start, instead of buying sort of generic solutions to a problem, just building their own custom apps to solve the problem, right? Like as cost goes down, right? Like so we'll have like an order of magnitude more apps, and from that probably an order of magnitude more developers, right? Like so we'll see in my mind the next 1 million, like 100 million developers into the field, and probably mainly working at the abstraction of these agents, right? Like, and then we'll probably have about the same amount of developers as now that are sort of fully versed in all the layers below what's there, and some that really traverse, right? Like, but then I think at the same time, then if the cost of building the kind of apps and sites we have today really go down, if you want to show up to your audience and your users as something more like that, right? Like, then you have to invest in starting to build experiences through use of AI and generative AI that that are more than what a team can build today, right? So
Yeah.
we'll also start needing to see that level of like, what does it look like if a big, like if a real brand want to convince you that we're doing something special, right? Like what does that level of digital
Mhm.
experiences look like? um and I think that I really hope that we can be part of giving developers the right tools to innovate there and come up with new compelling experiences, because we also want the web to be somewhere where people go to experience something,
Yeah.
and not just a completely sort of disintermediated like content world where in the end all your experiences are in some walled off agent gardens that like tells you what to buy or what to shop
Yeah.
and so on, right? Like we also want people to have like shared experiences of like, hey, go
Yeah.
check out this URL, like this is really amazing, or like go check out this experience, this is great. And I think we should strive to make the web a strong enough platform that's the platform where those shared experiences also takes place.
Yeah. Man, this is great. Let's end with this question. This is a question in everyone's mind right now. When you have this proliferation of web apps and all of this happening, right? Do you foresee a world maybe 2, 3 years from now where there are more agents accessing apps than there are humans? Because there's so much cognitive load now, right? As humans, we can't go, and you see humans delegating tasks to agents and saying, "Hey, go to this stuff for me," and the agent figuring out what to do. Or do you see like how do you see the human plus agents operating in this
Yeah.
world?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's two versions of the world. There's like a dystopian version where everything is just agents doing stuff for their own sake, and they've kind of like invented an economy 2.0 that's too fast for humans to even care about, and they run out and do their own thing. But hopefully, the world we all have to build is one where agents are mainly doing things because some human wants them to do things, right? Like, and yes, I think that a lot of traffic and a lot of like interactions will be agent driven, and probably just because you can have vast amounts more of agents, there'll probably be a higher amount of traffic. But I think some people forget that as humans we also want shared experiences, right? Like so
Mhm.
people think that it'll all be completely disintermediated by agents, and humans will actually never go like do stuff on a website, or they won't need an app, the agent will just go do things. In reality, we kind of like, even with humans, and we build apps because like it's not just each human going off and doing something. We actually need somewhere to see what's happening and to collaborate and to follow our work and so on. And as humans we also want, like, if I'm buying a product and I want my wife's opinion, I want to be able to send her like a link to that product that's the same as like that's not just something completely different for her, right? Like I wanted to share what I'm actually interacting with, right? Like if I'm working on a project with someone, I want to share my view with the project with my teammates, and I want them to be able to have a shared experience with me, right? Like, so I think sometimes there's sometimes people tend to forget that human aspect, and how it will still drive the way we eventually build software. So I think, yes, agents will do a lot of work for us, and they'll drive a lot of interactions, and like they will give a lot of new powers to us as developers, as users of products, and so on. But in the end, we're still building all of those products and all of those experiences for other humans, right? Like, so you might have an order of magnitude more agent interactions, but in a certain way, the one you really care about is the human one that in the end decides, is this something I want my agents to interact with at all?
Cool, Matt. On that note, I must say thank you. This was so insightful. I think, especially for developers out there who are building apps and trying to make them agent ready. And what does it mean, to use some of these tools in the future? This was amazing. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.